Tell you the truth, when Al and I started this business back in '63, we had no idea we'd become so successful or so big.
Al-jon, specializing in the engineering, manufacturing, and servicing of quality scrap processing equipment worldwide.
If I was in fact in the market to buy, the Al-jon 550 would be my choice.
Al-jon, the leader in articulated loaders, car crushers, log balers, and the combination engine puller fork assemblies.
It's amazing what can happen when good people focus on achieving a single goal.
Al-jon had very few resources when they started. We've discussed they didn't have any money, they didn't have any products, but they had two remarkable resources. Alan Sharp, a brilliant engineer, and John Neen, a guy that could sell anything.
We did have ideas, and we did have hopes and desires, and that's really where we based the company on.
John was a tremendous salesman. Al Sharp was a tremendous engineer. It was one of those kind of opposites attract.
We started out as a fabricator, which is a steel fabricator. You weld steel together and it can be anything. The first product we built was these steel containers, steel scrap buckets for a scrap company that would buy them from us. The second product that came along was a hydraulic lift truck that would lift these boxes up, carry them to their destination, dump them, bring the box back and put it at the customer. So that was hydraulic containers, and they're called off and on trucks. Off and on containers were what led us into the scrap business. Airplanes have certainly been a part of this company. I don't know how many we've owned. Wore out at least a half a dozen of them. But at that time I was the only marketing arm they had, the only salesman. And a lot of our customers were on the East Coast, some of them on the West Coast. It wasn't practical to drive, it wasn't practical to take commercial airlines.
John did the work of many salesmen because he used the airplane as a tool. He used it very effectively. And he was able to go out and do his business. Of course, we didn't have cell phones back in those days, but he was on the phone constantly back and forth to his office.
We did that probably every week for the next 10, 15 years. Monday morning, I'd come over and get in the plane, we'd take off, and after I'd have a cup of coffee, Strunk would turn around from the pilot seat and say, "Which way?" And I'd tell him whether we were going east, west, north, or south. And I'd get out my prospect list, find the hottest prospect I had that says, "We're going to Lafayette, Indiana." And from there, we'd try to get an order. If that didn't work, we'd go to the next one.
He had several little stops he wanted to make along the way, and the first one we stopped at, he wanted to make a little sales call, got a deposit, turned around, came back to Tumwa, put money in the bank so he could make payroll, turned around, headed back out towards the East Coast again. We might do that 2 or 3 times a week, get out, get a deposit, turn around, come back.
In about 1964, one of our customers, Frank Alder, came to us with a problem. And that's probably the most important word you'll ever hear from a customer, a problem. He gave us an opportunity to respond to his needs.
Mr. Alder always asked me every time I came, "John, why don't you build me a car squeezer," he called it. And I'd say, "Mr. Alder, I don't know how to build a car squeezer. I don't think there is such a thing." The conversation dropped, but sure enough, next time I'd go over to get an order, "John, why don't you build me a car squeezer?" And one day, unfortunately, around here, there wasn't any orders. The boys sitting on the floor looked at me and said, "John, you'd better go get an order or we're not going to get paid next week." So I got my old wore-out Mercedes-Benz and drove to Davenport, Iowa to see Mr. Alder. And I said to him, "Mr. Alder, we have decided we can build your car squeezer." And he says, "Oh, that's good, John. How much?" And I looked at him kind of straight and I said, "25,000? He says, "I give you 18. That's how we got in the car crusher business. We did get the car crusher built. We had it here in the shop floor and needed to be tested. And everyone said, "Well, we got to have a car to test it with." We didn't have any cars around here, but somebody mentioned that Alan had gone on vacation or something, and he had an old Chrysler station wagon out there that really was ready for the junk heap. And I said, go get the Chrysler. They went and got his Chrysler, put it in there, and that was the first car we crushed. And it just did a fine job. It came out about 6 inches thick and 6.5 foot wide. We picked it up after it was done and put it back in the same parking place that it was. Alan, when he came back from vacation, looked at it, didn't say a word, just went on back to his work and shop.
He crushed the boss's car basically and pulled it through with tractor and chain, and it worked fine, and Sharp come out and wanted to know where his car was. And old Sparky had to tell him he was standing on it.
It's been said at Al-jon we've been recycling long before recycling was cool. And the reason we do that is it's more economical to make new steel out of scrap than it is iron ore. And along the way, recycling kind of became popular. And about the time we started building car crushers, there was a big movement about to try to clean up America's roadsides and countrysides with all the junk that had accumulated over the last 100 years.
When Lady Bird and President Johnson first were in office, one of her prime projects was cleaning up the environment. And she determined that it was a good idea to get rid of these old junk automobiles around the countryside, laying in the ditches, one thing and another. And we sent her a photograph of our car crusher, and it says, Madam President, we have developed a machine that will solve this problem. And she appreciated us sending it to us and wrote us back a nice letter saying that was a good thing for us to do, and we hope to sell a lot of them. Now, I don't know whether we ever sold any directly from Mrs. Lyndon Johnson's efforts, but we did publicize the letter a little bit, and it didn't hurt us any, and probably helped us.
In the 70s, we needed a car crusher that would handle the larger automobiles. 80s, we got into 400 loggers at that time. We got into the 90s. They didn't have the big cars anymore. They didn't need the bigger car crushers.
As to the evolution of the car crusher, it was a rather lengthy process. It started out with a fairly simple machine and grew into a much more complicated machine. The original machine that we built was as I told you, kind of a stair step upside down and crushing jaw that you pulled the car through. You'd pull the car through with a cable. You'd put a cable on it. You'd pull it through, had a hydraulic winch here, the cable, and you hook it onto the front bumper, and you'd pull the car afoot, take a bite of it, open it up, pull it, take another bite of it. This is a long, involved process and took obviously too much time. We really learned how to crush cars, though, again from our friend Frank Alder, who after he came over here to see his first car crusher, and we crushed Alan's Chrysler in it, he was leaving and he says, boys, that's a good machine, he says, but I want you to do one more thing for me. And we said, what is that, Mr. Alder? And he said, I bought 10,000 cars over here in Drakesville, and I want you boys to go over and crush them up. That's how we learned about car crushing.
The equipment that we were building in the late 80s, we had just developed the first lid crusher. For years we had pushed the Model 20, which was a jaw-type crusher. It was the machine that had put Al-jon on the map.
We were making a lot of engine pullers and fork assemblies, and the engine pullers would physically go down and rip the engine out of the car. And it was really quite a scene to watch that happen. You know, guys were ripping motors out of vehicles and selling the iron at a higher price than just the car body.
Al-jon has built enough crushers to crush Detroit's daily production. We've had several models over the years of car crushers. We've also had bus crushers, computer crushers, office machine crushers. Matter of fact, we have a computer crusher in every IBM plant in the country.
As we visited scrapyards and watched our car crushers work and our engine puller tractor, hydrostatic tractor work, it became evident that there was a lot of loose scrap metal around, and seemed to be a need for some kind of a baler to take care of this loose tin, we call it. And that idea came from us visiting a landfill and seeing the need for it. We observed that they use track-type caterpillars. They use a little bit of everything to crush up this garbage. And I think it was both Alan's and my consensus that there must be a little better way to do that. And why couldn't we take our hydrostatic tractor, put some big old steel wheels on it, and see if that wouldn't crush up the garbage?
17 years ago, as we built machines, we built them with 1980s technology on our equipment, or 1950s technology in some areas on our equipment. For example, everything was done on a paper template, hand drawn out. We designed machines to the limitations of the equipment that we had, rather than to the expectations of the engineers that were designing them.
When we first started welding machines back in the early days, back in the 70s, our blueprints were actually on the posts that you see in the shop. We didn't have blueprints, so we would write the measurements down that were important on the post, and then as we was building the machine, if we couldn't remember a measurement, we'd walk over to the post and look at the measurement. Now we've got all AutoCAD drawings, very sophisticated, and it's just got better over the years.
I think the first thing that was funny when I came here, it seemed like 95% of the people working here were named Jim. There were Jims everywhere. So you had a really good shot at knowing, being able to say, hey Jim, and getting it right. Now that's kind of changed. Now we're moving to Jason's, and I'm just wondering where we're going to be going next.
Kendig always would come out here on Saturday with me and run around the place and ride his bike and this sort of thing. And we were in a little old building over here that we rented, had a chain hoist that we'd pick up pieces of steel with. Kendig, in his wisdom, found a 5-gallon bucket and put it on the end of this electric hoist, and he could run it up and down. So he needed some weight, so he took all of Charlie's tools and put it in the bucket and ran it up to the ceiling. And I hollered at him, time to go home, and he left them up there. The guys came in to work Monday morning, and they were frantic, no tools. They looked all over the place. Finally called me and said, John, we can't find any tools. And I said, well, I didn't take them. You'll have to look around. And so they did, and they finally found them where Kendig had put them up to the ceiling there. They got their tools down and went to work.
You know, stories have a habit over the years of being embellished. Although I can't recall the exact incident, I don't doubt that I would have probably had something to do with it along those lines.
Charlie Bacon, who was our first employee. Charlie Bacon worked for Alan Sharp's dad, and when he read in the paper that Alan and I were starting a new company, he came out and said, I want to work for Alan. He was our first employee. He worked for us until he died. Another great asset Charlie had. He had two fine assets, other than being loyal and hard worker. He could wield a sledgehammer, because we didn't build everything real precise then, and you sometimes had to pound on them. But his real asset to the company was that he brought his own tools, and we didn't have any tools.
I brought some records that show my dad's first paycheck, and April 24th he made $6.28 because he worked a Saturday for Mr. Sharp, and then his first full paycheck was $68.70, which is a $10 raise from the job he had. So he started working here in April '63. I didn't come along until August of '72.
We've always had experience with junkyard dogs, and we have always had a junkyard dog, or a JID, on our premises. Sarah was here from the early 80s up until the very, very early 90s. As a replacement to Sarah, Mel came in. Now, Mel was born and bred in a junkyard in Kearney, New Jersey, and Mel was here for 10 years. We had his sister, Sprocket, after that time, and Sprocket was here for a number of years. And Zeke is the current JID in residence at Al-jon. And the JIDs have always been responsible for two areas. Mental health coordination, because if you can pet a JID, you feel better about it. And they also are in charge of limited security, because they make noise when they see something that's a little bit strange. But we are the only company that I know of that has doggy doors built into all of our break rooms and areas, so that our JIDs can float from one area and go and enjoy lunch with all of their friends.
Al-jon is definitely a David and Goliath comparison, especially for our solid waste division, where unlike the scrap division, where they're selling against primarily other family-owned businesses or smaller direct sale type businesses, our solid waste division is up against Caterpillar, Bomag, and Terex, who are three huge multi-billion-dollar